Hi, it's Sparkles Watson here, and one of my go-to products from Foreign Equine is the NutriCalm gel. We have a little racehorse who would get worried about traveling and sort of going out and about in different places, so I would always give him one of the syringes because it sort of just helps him focus and stay calm. But then right on the other end of the spectrum, I gave it to Talisman at Burley, and that really helped him take a deep breath and focus, so much so that he was actually able to go in the main arena and contain himself and do a dressage test, which is a really hard thing for him. So this product is fantastic. Like I say, I would use it right from the babies right through to the big ponies, and it's just brilliant at taking the edge off them and making them focus and relaxed.
So the season is fast approaching, and this can be a time of year that can be a little bit nerve-wracking for some people. Your season may have already started. We're in February. Some seasons have already started. If not, most of the time, it's March when it all kicks off. Whether you've got that pre-season butterflies or maybe your winter didn't quite go to plan, I thought this would be the perfect time of year to invite lovely Nicky Pennie, our empowerment coach, back on the podcast to talk through how to settle your nerves and overcome a few issues in the build up to the season. Thank you so much, Nicky, for coming back on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Rosie. It's a real pleasure to be here again.
We love having you back on because you were on last year. So I'll leave the link in the show notes if anybody wants to go check that show out. But Nicky back on our Grassroots Foreign Equine podcast, I feel like this is the perfect time. We've had our listeners send in some questions because I wanted to make the show all about the listeners as what you guys want to overcome on the start of the season. So the first question we've had sent in, Nicky, and I think this is a perfect one for the start of the season. This listener has said, I worry about events, and in the build up to events, I feel very sick the week before. How can I help this?
Yeah, great question. So I think the first thing to say is you're not alone, because lots of people feel that way. And what I would say is ask yourself what's causing you to feel sick. Because when you can actually get underneath what it is that you feel sick about specifically, then you can start to look at why it's causing you to feel that way. So is it nerves, for example? And if it is, what specifically are you nervous about? Because here's how the mind has a tendency to work. It tends to just do a blanket, I'm really nervous, I feel really sick. And then if we kind of just stop at that, then we're kind of stuck in the, we enter competitions because actually this is what we love to do. This is our hobby. People listening to this, I'm guessing they're not professionals. So it's got to be enjoyable. So actually really kind of tasking your mind with, what is it that's making me feel this sensation that I don't want to feel? So when you can get clear on that, so is it falling off, for example? Is that what this person's worried about? Is it not being good enough, which is a really big thing for a lot of people? Are you worried about forgetting your test? Are you worried about specific phase, whatever that might be? Identify what you feel sick about and then have a look at why. So I get into the detail with clients that I work with about what's causing that feeling. And usually it's a story that your mind has created. So those people that listen to the last podcast, they'll know that I used to suffer with debilitating competition nerves. And the stories that my mind made up that led to those debilitating nerves were, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to let my horse down. I'm not good enough. Now, none of those thoughts were helpful, particularly when my goal was to go out and perform well. So I did the work to get underneath what was creating those thoughts. And what I see a lot, particularly for amateur riders, because we put a lot of ourselves in, we invest a lot in, working with coaches, equestrian riding coaches, often feeling sick or anxious or whatever it is can be a sign that there's too much focus on the outcome. So the outcome of the event I've entered, but rather than actually kind of going in with I'm going to take each phase as it comes and do my best, because that's all you can actually do, there can be a pressure of, I've got to finish sub 30. Otherwise, I'm not good enough. Otherwise, I haven't done enough training over winter. And I think that where, as amateur riders, we can kind of cut ourselves some slack is by taking some of that pressure off, because when we do that, we get more enjoyment. So I would encourage this person that's sent this question in, and anybody else who feels like this, of which I think there's probably many, I've been there myself for sure, ask yourself, why did you start eventing? Or even like, why did you start riding? And hopefully it's because you enjoyed it, because let's be honest, it's not an easy sport to do. But, maybe you feel sick because you don't feel ready for the level that you've entered for. So step down a level and then see how that feels. And if that feels less sort of sick inducing, then step back up again if it feels like a breeze. But this is your hobby. Just let it be fun. And then your horse will enjoy it and you'll enjoy it more. And I guess the final thing on this for me, and this is such a big thing that I think a lot of riders don't necessarily either know, or if they do know, they've forgotten. This might be news. Competing is a test of your training. That's it.
I love that.
It's like you've done all the work you've done over winter, or maybe you haven't, and that's fine too. But what you're doing by going out and competing is getting information about where you're at in your training.
I really like seeing competing as, like you say, a feedback tool almost from your training, because you're right. We do forget that this is our hobby. This is supposed to be fun. We're supposed to enjoy it. And when you get nervous, you get wrapped up in the, oh my gosh, I feel nervous, I feel sick. And it can be hard to take that step back. And it's important, like you say, to step back. Why am I feeling this way?
And I think the thing is, like I say, you get the information about where you're at in your training. And if you do well, you might get a rosette or a prize. Great. But focus on the process of each phase. Focus on riding your dressage test and having 3 things in your mind that you want to work on, rhythm, straightness, and being forward maybe. Do your best. Then you go into the show jumping. You might be focusing on the same things, rhythm, straightness, and connection or something. And the same within the cross country. You cannot do any more than your best. And when you focus on, I'm just going to do my best, I'm going to talk about control later on, I'm sure, but you can only control yourself, which is your attitude and your effort. You cannot control the dressage judges. You cannot control whether other people are going to jump clear or not be on their A game. You'll enjoy it far more and hopefully not feel sick if you literally focus on each phase doing your best, rather than I must do sub 30 dressage, I must jump clear in the show jumping, I must FOD. Like, those things might be largely out of your control. And if you're putting pressure on yourself, you're going to be taking the kind of joy of why you started, in my view, away.
It's having that tunnel vision when you go in and focusing on yourself. And our next question that's come in is about a fall, actually. Somebody said, how do I get confidence back after a scary fall? I believe this person has had quite a bad rotational fall, and it can be a hard old thing to get back on after having a difficult fall.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say look at what happened that contributed to the fall. So you're getting information. So was it like a freak accident that it was completely out of the blue, there was no sign of it? Or was it something that you or your horse have struggled with before? Because when you've got that information, you can then start to take steps to make sure that hopefully it doesn't happen again. So a quote that I share with people that I really like, I don't actually know who said it, so I can't credit them, but it's confidence is preparation. Everything else is beyond your control. So as we know, it's a dangerous sport and things can happen that we don't expect. So I would say ask yourself a number of questions, or if you've got a riding coach, talk these through with them. Like, how many times if it was a fence, which obviously it was a rotational, how many times have you jumped that type of fence and not had a fall? Because the brain will focus on the thing that was scary, the thing that hurt, the thing that was painful. But if it was, let's say it was a corner, you see a lot of horses leaving a knee at like the high brush corner. Like, if you've jumped fences like that, like 40, 50, 60 times before, and you've not had a fall, you can remember that it was just, you can see that it was just one of those things. That helps you to start to get some context. presumably this person has spoken to their trainers about the fall and what contributed it, which is certainly what I would be doing in their shoes. But if you can get the context, you can stop the sort of train that your mind wants to get on, which could be something like you can't jump corners or drops into water or trichainers or whatever it might be. And depending on how much something like this is impacting you, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a fall. There's like sometimes people who've been bolted with or had, a problem out hacking in traffic or whatever. If there's something in your mind that you just can't seem to get past it, no matter what you do, myself and other coaches like me can work with you to kind of target those memories and emotions and actually just dial down the impact of them. So the thing that's kind of causing you to feel scared, you can just put it in the past in a way that it's quite difficult to do on your own. So if it's something that you feel like you've exhausted all of the options and you want to kind of go, oh, I really want some input, then, feel free to get in touch. But I think if you're okay in general, but you're struggling with fear about similar types of offences, which, let's be honest, it would be completely normal. It would be a bit strange if you didn't have any apprehension. Then, work with a supportive coach. Start small, build your confidence over smaller versions. Also, of course, check in with how your horse is feeling confidence-wise, because, of course, they could be having some residual concerns as well. And just build up to get really confident. And I say this again, a bit like in the last response, there's nothing wrong with kind of stepping back temporarily, because, if this is an amateur rider, not to say that you can't be ambitious, building your ambition on potentially shaky foundations could lead to, something that you don't want. Far better to kind of step back for a few events or even a season, if that's what you and your horse need, to build up and then go again. But having kind of trusted people around you that can give you their honest advice about what they see in your riding around sort of similar fences or levels is invaluable in my view.
That one step back could be 10 steps forwards in the future, couldn't it?
And I think it's really in seeing that it's not necessarily even a step back. It's like a solidification, if that's even a word, of kind of confidence, just to bolster. Like, I know a lot of people, if they finish the season at 100, they might not want to go back out at 90. But if you haven't competed since October, out on grass, that to me just makes good sense. Far better to go back and just, go hop round a 90 and have it feel like an absolute walk in the park than walk the course of the 100 and be like, oh my God, I need a gym before I get on. Again, it's got to be fun. And like you say, stepping back to ultimately go forward, I would always be an advocate.
Well, this next one is one that I think that we've had a few people wonder about. Why is it the show jumping that most eventers get so anxious about, and what can we do to improve this area mentally?
Interesting. So I'm not sure that most eventers get anxious at the show jumping. And the reason I say that and kind of labour the point of most is because that's actually an assumption on behalf of this person sent the question in, and it might not be helping them. So if you were to go and watch, say, badminton or Burley, there'll be a lot more riders looking a lot greener around the gills on cross-country morning than there will be on a Sunday morning. Now, I appreciate we're not talking to 5-star riders here, but I think I want to make the point that when we have a belief about something, in this case, the show jumping is where most eventers get so anxious, we can then kind of get on board with that belief and go, oh God, it's show jumping, I need to get anxious. That's not a conscious thought. That's just eventers are no good at show jumping, in quotes, which isn't necessarily true. And the example that I like to give, it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Remember in lockdown, there was suddenly everybody was going mad and buying toilet rolls, despite the fact that COVID was not related to anything that required toilet rolls. It kind of, if there's a belief that there's a shortage of toilet rolls, in quotes, everyone goes out and buys toilet rolls, and that creates a shortage of toilet rolls. It's the same thing. If we believe that, everybody gets anxious, every eventer gets anxious about show jumping. So I think if you have the belief, or anybody has the belief, that one discipline is harder than another, you're going to expect to find it difficult. And the way that our mind focuses on things, it will find things to be difficult about. So you will be more anxious as a result, because basically if we think something is going to be hard, then it will be. It's one of the idiosyncrasies of the mind. So what can you do about that? So for people who do get anxious about show jumping, which I totally know that there are some, here are my thoughts on why that might be. So show jumping takes accuracy. If your horse can jump really well cross country, that might feel easier because there's a lot more space between the fences. So, and at the lower levels, a horse that's got a decent jump can take an iffy stride cross country. But for show jumping, seeing a stride and getting a good enough rhythm in a smaller space is a skill. So we all have a tendency to train the things that we like. So if you don't train show jumping as much as you train dressage and cross country, then you're not going to be as competent as you are at the other two disciplines, which is then going to increase your anxiety levels. So interestingly, the second part of the question that you asked was, what can we do to improve this area mentally? Training. Yes, your mind plays a part. So if you've told yourself that all eventers don't like show jumping, ask yourself, is that true? Have you spoken to every single eventer in the world? I'm guessing the answer is no. It's a belief you have, which is okay. But the way to, when I said earlier, confidence is preparation, everything else is beyond your control. You improve mentally around something when you are confident in your ability to do it well. And you do that through training because you know you've done the foundational work. So putting in the effort to work on something that you find difficult, because you wouldn't feel anxious if you didn't find it difficult, that's how you improve mentally. So you'll improve your skill level, which improves your confidence. So just notice if you're telling yourself, I feel anxious at the show jumping, that's a surefire way to make it a reality that it's difficult for you. But what are you doing? So are you show jumping over the winter, or are you going, I don't like show jumping, so I'm not going to do it? It's the kind of doing the hard stuff first, because once you do the hard stuff becomes easier.
And you've got to be quite brave almost to have that reflection, look at yourself and go, right, I know that this is my weakness. I have been avoiding it because it's hard. Let's go for it.
And importantly, nothing ever gets any easier when we avoid it.
Yes.
I used to have a real issue with canter transitions. And when I resolved canter transitions, it was because I did flipping hundreds of them because it's like, it's the face your fear kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing with show jumping as well, go out and register BSJA because you'll jump things that are far more technical. So that I used to do a lot more show jumping than eventing back in the day. And so I was show jumping before I actually went eventing. I was quite surprised by the height of the tracks and also the length of them. They were like 10 fences, whereas you'll get 12 in, if not 13 or 14 in show jumping, and they'll be much less technical. So if you go and do pure show jumping, even if it's at the level below, because they tend to build them more up to height, you'll walk your course in eventing and be like, oh, this is fine. And that then will improve your confidence and you'll very quickly lose any anxiety about it. So challenging yourself, you don't need to go out, if you're competing at 90, you don't need to go out and do 110 BSJA, but if you went out and did a 90 BSJA, it would be a lot more technical, I suspect, than anything you would find in eventing. And so the idea is you want to walk the course and have it feel like, oh yeah, we can do this, no worries.
I really like that, going and exploring different disciplines, because it all helps back to your eventing. Now, our next question has come in saying, and I think is one that some people will struggle with, how to believe in yourself and your ability more, because I think we are all very guilty of putting ourselves down.
Amateur riders especially, and I think this is the one that the pros, they know how important self-belief is, because the minute they have a chink in their armor, it really does show up. So I think we can definitely look to the pros to say, what are they doing in their mindset, and what can we do to really learn from that? And it's a little bit about what I spoke about earlier. The two things that we can control, our attitude and our effort. So everything else is outside of our control. So if this person, you're not believing in yourself and your ability, ask yourself what you're focusing on. Is it all the things that you think you can't do, or is it on what you can do? Because if you focus on what you can't do, of course, you're not going to believe in yourself, because you're going to be down on yourself and think, well, I'm a bit useless. If you're focusing on things that you can do and things that you're doing well, you can then start to stretch your comfort zone a little bit more and improve there. So really look at, where are you focusing your energy? The other thing I'd say is I'd encourage this person to consider, is riding the only area of your life where you don't believe in yourself? Because for most people, it's not necessarily that they need greater self-belief, it's that they need more self-worth. Now, that you might think, oh, well, hang on, how does self-worth feed into self-belief? Believing in yourself often comes as a result of you valuing yourself. So if you don't value yourself, if you think that you're not good enough, if you think that you're not worthy of achieving good things, you're more likely to be down on yourself. You're more likely to focus on the fact that you had a rail down in the show jumping, rather than the rest of the round you met every fence on a nice stride, you kept a good rhythm, you didn't flap in front of the oxer, if that's something that you've done before, instead of seeing possibilities. So it's really kind of looking at, what are you telling yourself with, and you, if you're not aware of the kind of voice in your head because it's automatic, just slowing down and just noticing, what are you saying to yourself? So if you have a fence down, using that example, do you come out and go, oh, I had a fence down, that's so ridiculous? Because in your mind, a clear round is the only acceptable thing. But what about all of the other stuff that actually went really well? You can build on that. You can't necessarily build on having, the fence down. Yes, you can look at why it happened and you can take steps to go, did I not have a good enough canter? Did I cut the corner? Was I not looking at my fence? And it's important to do that bit, but actually there will be things in that round. That was one aspect. What was good in the rest of it? So if you can ride to an okay standard and you've got a coach who's telling you that you're ready to do something, but you don't believe that you can because you have a lack of self-belief, that's a sign to me that your view of yourself, your self-worth, is really shaky. And that's pretty common for women and some men. The root cause is usually not about riding at all. That was the case for me. And so many people that I've worked with who've come to me to say, I just don't believe in myself. It can feel like, well, if I just was more confident, what's causing the lack of confidence is something much deeper down.
So would you take a step back then and have a look at why you don't feel you're worthy enough?
Yeah. So if I had a client who was coming to me with a lack of self-belief, and from a technical riding perspective, they actually were fine and their horse was capable of what they were doing, I would be asking them very targeted questions, which is, well, what is it that you're worried about? Because it's usually a bit like we started around, I'm going to mess up, I'm going to let my horse down, whatever it is, and really get underneath that. So I think it depends on, obviously everybody's very different, but it depends on what is the kind of overarching thing that's causing them to lack belief. Because if you have the evidence that you can go out and do whatever it is that you want to do, but you're kind of really struggling on the day, getting into the specifics of what that is, like what's causing you to crumble, is it a specific phase? It's usually something fear related underneath. And it's usually a story that the mind is kind of telling you. So there's a real balance. So I would say, make sure you're not pushing yourself too far out of your comfort zone in your riding, or you'll scare yourself and you'll snap back to, I can't do it. So if you're pushing yourself too far, and then you get to kind of build up incrementally. It's a real balance with kind of self-belief and self-confidence of kind of stretching your comfort zone so that you grow, but not that so much that you kind of have the potential to scare yourself or your horse. And so it's kind of walking that tightrope of, you might have seen a diagram where you've got the large circle, which is kind of your comfort zone, and you want to go just to the kind of edge of that. But the outside of the circle is like your panic zone. You don't want to be in your panic zone. You want to be just stretching your comfort zone. And again, it's kind of depending on what people's goals are. Are your goals, like, are they yours? Have you decided that you must qualify for badminton grassroots? And actually that pressure that you're putting on yourself is kind of more than you need right now, because maybe you've got something going on in work. I guess I would get underneath what is happening in relation to the belief. As long as you have the ability to ride at the level that you want and your horse can do it, once we've kind of checked all those things off, I would just go a little bit deeper into what's causing people to lack self-worth, and there can be a myriad of reasons, to be honest.
Now, with our next question, I think that with the growth of social media, this is something that we've all been doing an awful lot more, and something that many of us are not very good at. We've had sent in how to stop comparing yourself to others.
Interesting. Comparisonitis is
Yes.
what I call this. And a lot of people kind of go, oh, comparison, it's the thief of joy. And it can be. But I think comparing yourself to others doesn't need to be a bad thing. And people might be like, what? But if I compare myself to others, then I feel awful. So of course it's a bad thing. What on earth are you talking about? Here's the way that I would look at that. If you feel envious of someone else, it's because they have something you want. Now, that might be success in their riding. And if this is what we're talking about, you can let them be your inspiration. So rather than kind of going, oh, I look at everybody online and they make me feel like I'm not good enough, let's flip that around and go, what is it that they're doing that I would love to be doing? Because that's essentially what's happening. It's just your mind is making it mean that you're not good enough. So again, remember, we all have the ability of where we focus our attention. Of course, any of us could look at anybody and go, well, they're doing so much better than me. Fine. But actually, what is it that they're doing that you are admiring, even though it might not feel like that's what you're doing? You are admiring them in some way. What are they doing? And what do you want to be doing that they're doing as well? Because I genuinely do believe if something is possible for one person, it's possible for you as well. If, this caveat, you're willing to put in the work. So back to the show jumping. If somebody always jumps clear and you're envious of that, you get to put the work in and you can work on yourself. So if you see someone doing well, take that as a kind of feedback. What can you do to improve that they're doing that you think is great or is making you envious? Notice, though, if your mind is telling you, oh, something like it's all right for them because they've got horsey parents. It's all right for them because they've got a ready-made horse. Because if you're seeing them online, which I presume this is where this is coming from, you can't know their reality. We can all look at shiny accounts and think, oh, they've got it made. But you might see them out getting placed and then look and you kind of go, oh, I'd love to do that. But you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. But if what you want is to, you've identified, I want to go out and be getting placed as well, great. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? Work back from that place and make a plan. And I think really kind of seeing it as an opportunity as to what you're actually being inspired by, rather than looking at other people and going, oh, I'm rubbish. Yeah, you can play that game, but you're just going to feel worse. Take it as, what I think is actually happening, which is a sign that you're kind of wanting something more than you currently have, which is a great thing because that then gives you something to work on.
I love that flip of perspective because we already look and go, oh, that's not me. But now we can flip and go, right, how does that become me?
Because I think it's a really good point that the people that we see might be probably not the finished product, but, they'll be significantly further forward than they were, say, 12, 24 months ago. That's possible for you too. And it's really, they've done the work and put the effort in, and I'm sure they're still on the journey. And I think that, it's a little bit of the kind of iceberg, isn't it? What you see is the result. What you don't see is all of the hard work, the effort, the tears, etc., that's gone into it. I guess what I would say is if you're doom scrolling on social media, and I know that, people do get into these patterns if they're not, we'll talk a little bit about that later, I think. And if the upshot is that you don't feel good enough because of the doom scrolling, first of all, ask yourself, what could you better use your time for than, just scrolling social media that's making you feel rubbish? But also, you have the unfollow button. If you don't have to follow accounts, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's personal to that account, but if you're finding it's not making you feel good, unfollow people. And if you want to, follow accounts that are uplifting and encouraging. Another thing I would say is if you're a nervous rider, be really careful not to follow lots of nervous rider groups, because what you're doing is filling your mind with being nervous. And we become the sum of the people that we spend the most time with. So balancing, yes, it's good to know that you're not alone, because actually sometimes you can feel like the only person that, struggles with applying what they've learned in their lesson to actually then when they ride at home. But if what you're doing is surrounding yourself by people who are forever feeling nervous every time they enter a competition, that can be infectious. And I would suggest that's not a good thing.
It's almost like a bit of self-sabotage, isn't it? When you're surrounding yourself with that mindset as well. So no, I love that, trying to just rejig your social media, change the algorithm, find things that uplift you.
Definitely. And I think just really being aware of that. So it can be so easy to be on social media, and I've done it myself, where you spend half an hour and you don't really know what you're doing on there, and you come off and you feel, ugh. Like, notice how you feel afterwards. And I've absolutely, over the years, changed who I follow and how much time I spend on there, because it's fine just to kind of have a bit of a look, but being a bit more intentional about what you're on social media for.
Yes.
Like, how many people do you hear go, I haven't got time? And it's like, well, then if you put a little thing on your phone that tells you how much time you spend on it, you might see where your time's going.
Well, our next question really links nicely with our mindset and changing our perspective that we've been talking about, because this listener has asked, I have a negative mindset and I want to change my perspective. How do I go about it?
So the first thing I would say is awesome that you recognize that you have a negative mindset and that you want to change it, because being aware of it is like and wanting to change it is kind of step one and step two. So well done to this person for kind of recognizing what's going on and they want to change it. Lifestyle habits is the biggest thing that contributes to a negative mindset. And to be honest, modern life does not set us up to feel good. Like the prevalence of like anxiety and depressive thoughts and negativity has become so much greater in the last 15 years. And there's a few things that you can do, and I don't want to overload anybody, because this is really about picking one and sort of starting small rather than thinking you have to do everything and then not being able to do anything because it's too overwhelming. Who are you spending time around? A bit like I said there, be mindful of not spending time around nervous riders or too much time around nervous riders because it becomes infectious. Like, if you have a negative mindset, the people that you talk to and spend time with the most, would you categorize them as being negative? And if that's the case, then, surround yourself with people who are more uplifting, would be my view. A really big one, and this can be quite straightforward, is if you're not getting enough quality sleep. Like, the world looks like a much better place when we've had a good 8 hours of quality sleep. So consistently getting sleep, it's free. So many people will tell us how tired they are. That's a huge one. What we eat has a massive impact on how we feel. And I think this is a big thing in the equestrian community, because a lot of people are on the go. They're managing their horses around working full time. So if you're eating processed food, so takeaways, crisps, chocolates, not to say never eat them, but if the predominant diet is all like convenience food, it's really going to impact. You're going to be much more likely to have a negative mindset than if you are cooking stuff for yourself. So even if you might be short of time, if you followed my account for a while, I'm a massive fan of batch cooking. Like, yesterday I had a bolognese in the slow cooker and it made 6 portions, or actually 12 portions, so for me and my husband. And that it took me 15 minutes to prepare it, and then it's in the slow cooker for 5 hours, and it will take me 10 minutes to warm that up and some spaghetti. So just really small things that, I can't tell you, makes such a huge difference. And then dehydration. So if you're not drinking enough water, again, on the go, I always try and make sure that when I go and muck out on a morning, I take a bottle of water with me. When I come in and have coffee, I make sure I've got some water afterwards, because our brain is a really high percentage of water. And again, like, how we feel if we're dehydrated, everything will become so much harder. So really small things. Just take a look at what you're eating. Are you getting enough quality sleep? And are you hydrated? Do those things and do a little bit of a sense check of who you're spending your time with. And again, maybe a little bit on social media. What are you following? Are you watching the news all the time? Essentially what you're consuming. Have a look at those things and see, but pick one to get started rather than trying to get a complete new friendship group. Drink 7 liters of water a day or whatever. Pick one and start small. Sleep would probably be the best one to start with, I would suggest.
It's fascinating how all those external factors can link into your mindset and your perspective, and the little things all add up to the greater picture, don't they?
Oh, hugely. And I think the thing about sleep, be off your phone in the last hour before you go to sleep, and don't have the telly on, because it's the screens, the light from the screens that really impact your ability to properly sleep. So read a physical book, read a magazine, or listen to an audio book, but obviously not whilst, have your phone out of sight. Because if you can do that, you'll be amazed how much better you will feel. And then once you feel better through that, you're much more likely to be like, do you know what? I am going to make a curry in my, get a slow cooker, or I am going to make the effort to get some stuff in the fridge. Making life easy for yourself, I would say, around food, because it can feel, I used to live on takeaway when I had a ridiculously stressful corporate job, and I felt awful a lot of the time. But if you'd have said to me then, oh, well, just start cooking things from scratch, and I've got, I haven't got time. But actually, once you realize the difference that you feel by changing the things that you eat, and I still do have takeaway occasionally, whereas before I probably was eating takeaway 90% of the time and having decent food 10% of the time. Now it's flipped the other way, and it makes a huge difference. So yeah, absolutely, small things add up both ways, positively and negatively.
Well, one listener has sent in, I can get snappy with people and want to know how to change my reaction. Well, in the equestrian world, I've seen this a few times when people have come out of rounds, haven't quite gone to plan, and aren't able to control their emotions, because it can be very overwhelming. How would you go about trying to manage this? Because obviously this person doesn't want to be snappy, but is feeling it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. And I know myself, when people are feeling under pressure, they can snap at the people that are there to support them, and they don't mean to, and then they can feel terrible afterwards. I mean, I think if there's too much focus on the outcome, like we talked about right at the top of the podcast, and you're putting too much pressure on yourself, can you just dial that back a little bit? Can you get back into I'm just going to focus on what I've learned in training. I'm just going to go and do my best. Because when you do that, you take the pressure off, which probably means you're a nicer person to be around for your support team, for your horse, and all of those things. If that doesn't quite cut it, and it's still a struggle, because again, this person could be talking about more broadly in life as well, understand what's underneath why you snap at people. So just sort of take a moment, think about the last time you snapped at somebody and you had that feeling of guilt afterwards, which I'm sure we can all relate to, that I shouldn't usually to our partners or sometimes to a really good friend. What was underneath why you were snapping at them? Was it because usually it's to do with kind of feeling that we've screwed up somewhere, or we didn't feel prepared, or whatever it is. Just kind of take a moment to have a look at that, not from a place of judging yourself and beating yourself up, but from a place of real curiosity. So is it about the person that you snapped at? Do you actually have the right people around you if they're at a show? Let's use that as an example. Do you have people around you that make you feel like you've got to do something in a certain way? And if that's the case, maybe they're not the right person to have around at a show, and because it's kind of causing you to feel a certain way. Or is it something else? Is it certain people? Do you even like those people? It sounds like an odd thing to say, but, there's a lot of people that have been friends with people for years, and so they just kind of carry on. But actually they're like, oh, I don't really want to spend time with them. And that's a bigger conversation, of course, but, looking at it from all angles. So I think look at what triggers you, and then you can start to see what's underneath that. It's a difficult one without being able to speak to this person. But I think if you can understand what triggers you, you then can start to create a little bit of space. Because usually what happens is we'll feel a feeling in our body for an absolute millisecond before we react and snap at somebody. When you can kind of slow down and start to observe it, you can feel the feeling in your body, and then you can just create a little bit of space between that feeling and then snapping. So you can then just go, no, not every time, and it takes practice, then you can choose to take a deep breath instead of reacting, which is obviously more powerful. And then you don't have to apologize to that person because you haven't had to, you haven't had a go at them. I think it's just really knowing yourself as well. So when I was working on my riding nerves, talking 8 years ago, I think now, I really hated it when people came and talked to me at shows, like in between the process. So I would surround myself with certain people who kind of knew how to manage me. So like my husband, my coach, if she was available, like my coach's daughters came and helped me when I was really kind of just starting out, because it was their horse that I had on loan. I was in the zone and I didn't want to be around people who weren't in my inner circle. So I consciously made an effort of staying in my bubble, and then I'd go and talk to those people afterwards. And it's okay to do that, because for me, I was dealing with so much noise in my riding nerves in my head that I kind of needed to have that level of separation to be able to focus. And then once I'd finished, I could go, okay, now I can talk to people. And if you're dealing with something kind of similar, don't feel like you have to be all things to all people. And I have, my husband, bless him, he's incredibly understanding. He would start talking to me about something totally unrelated to horses while I was like getting ready to go cross country. And I'd be like, can we talk about that later? And he's like, oh, yes,
now.
Yeah, but without kind of going, oh my God, I'm about to go cross country. Why are you talking to me about this? Which is what I probably would have done before I kind of got a handle on it all. But it's okay to be able to kind of say, I just need to focus on this right now. It doesn't make you a bad person. And it's just really knowing yourself, I think. But I think just having a little reflect for this person about what was the snapping about, and then just kind of following the thought process from there could be really valuable for them.
Yeah, that's self-reflection, to look in, see where it's coming from. And I think sometimes need to find that gap between the feeling and have a little deep breath, because you're right, it can just all flurry at you at once, and that can be quite hard to control sometimes.
I think the other thing about that is we have a tendency to feel guilty for behaving in a way that we think is bad, right? So it's like, oh, I snapped at somebody. And then there's quite a lot of judgment attached to that. But I think so that often that can be a case of, well, I don't want to think about that because I did something wrong, in quotes. Whereas actually the value in that's why I say looking at something from curiosity, not judgment, the value in kind of going, okay, I snapped at somebody, that's not ideal. You know, I love this person, or I really care about them, and I didn't want to do that. But slowing down enough rather than racing on to the next thing. And this is a big part for a lot of people. And, you know, equestrians are all busy, right? But just taking the time to go, why did I snap at that person? Not because I'm going to beat myself up and say that I'm horrible, but, you know, what led to it? Because there's a lot of value in that. And it might sound very basic, but do that on a number of things. You start to get to know yourself better. Then you understand what does trigger you, and then you can start to deal with it. And that's a skill that I think would benefit a lot of people.
Now, our final question that has come in is, I'm a huge overthinker. What advice do you have to help with this?
Oh, overthinking. Okay. So I think that there's kind of two parts of this. I think the first bit is similar to the negative mindset question. So the lifestyle factors that we talk about. We really overthink when our brain is out of balance. So sleep, what we eat, hydration, who we spend our time around. So focus on one, like we said, or it will just be too much. But just having a look at that, because overthinking is usually a sign that our brain is a little bit out of whack with something. A bit like we talked about earlier, do you only overthink in your riding? Or does it happen in work, in relationships, with your friendships, that kind of thing? Journaling, so writing things down, can be a great way of getting thoughts out of your head to get some clarity. And actually, the last question about the snapping, if rather than just thinking about why was I snapping, capturing it on paper or typing it into your phone, or even voice notes into your phone, can actually be really valuable. Just gets things out of your head, you get clarity on them. But overthinking is usually based on fear about the future. So the brain goes into an overthinking mode when you're worried about something in the future. So you're worried that something's going to happen that you don't want. That's usually what causes the overthinking spiral. Here's something powerful that can help. Most things that people worry about never happen. Yeah. So think about, you're giving me a wry smile. All the things you've worried about, how many of them have happened? I
predict, this might happen, let's prepare for it. And then it doesn't.
Yeah. So that's a really good thing for us to talk about, because the brain is a prediction machine. So your brain is trying to predict what might happen. That's good. Your brain's working the way that it's designed to. it predicts because it's trying to protect you from kind of threats, and threats are stressors in this example. So, but where the challenge comes, and I think we might have touched on this briefly on the last podcast, I call it catastrophizing, catastrophe planning, like thinking to the nth degree. And that's quite tiring. So recognizing that, most of the things that people worry about never happen, but looking into the things that are kind of front of mind, it can be a sign of actually that could do with some attention. I would like to spend some time on that because it's big, and being able to distinguish between something that's just like a niggle that's playing on a loop versus something that needs more attention is important. But the other thing that can give people some relief and can help you to start to challenge the overthinking that the brain will do naturally is by understanding the future is unknown. So you've got the dichotomy there of the fact that the brain is a prediction machine. It's trying to predict what will happen, but the future is unknown. So you've got a complete, it's trying to predict something that it can't know until the future becomes the present, and then whatever is going to happen is going to happen. The other thing that I talk to people, particularly who are in this overthinking spiral, and I think it's got worse since kind of COVID, because I think lots of things that we thought were in our control, they never were, but they felt like they were. We're a lot, I think a lot of us got rocked by that, and who wouldn't? It was very stressful times and uncertain times for many people. You don't know what's going to happen because the future is unknown, but you will deal with whatever happens.
Yes.
And how do I know that? Because you've dealt with everything that's ever happened to you up until now.
Yeah, it's really powerful when you think of it like that actually I've done this.
Yeah. And all of the difficult things that we have been through, not to say that, they will have been easy at the time or even what people wanted, but by virtue of the fact that we're still here, you did deal with them. So I think the brain being a prediction machine, it's to try and, protect us from the threats. Firstly, we're all far more capable than we realize because we kind of have to be, because when life happens, we do deal with it. But actually, by recognizing that we will deal with whatever happens, you can then kind of go, so I don't need to have this incessant need to know what's going to happen, because firstly, you can never know until it arrives. And secondly, I'll deal with it because I have the evidence that, who hasn't had tough things to deal with? And so, just take Bubby Upton as an example. I had listened to the podcast, it was earlier this week, wasn't it? She had that fall last summer. She was due to go to Burley, take 2 horses, and she had a, potentially life-changing fall. And then I heard on the podcast, she's got 3 horses entered for an event in March. And yet she's been through a huge amount of rehab. Now, she's made a huge recovery. It wasn't what she wanted. It wasn't in her plan, but she's dealt with it. And it's really about kind of recognizing we don't know what's going to happen. But if we spend our time, again, remember what we can focus on is our effort and our attitude. If we spend our time worrying about what might happen rather than enjoying what is happening, enjoy what's happening right now, change what you can change, and life will deliver the rest. And we just get to respond to it. But I think really recognizing it's fine. The brain is designed to predict, but it's not helpful. So noticing most of the things that we worry about never happen, and whatever does come, even if it's what you don't want, you will deal with it because you've dealt with everything else up until now.
Nicky, it's been absolutely amazing to hear all your advice today. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been lovely. I've really enjoyed it.
If anybody wants to find out a bit more about you and your work, where can they find some information on you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, which is beyourbestyet.co.uk. I think it's /equestrian that you'll find on there. I'm not as active these days on social media because I've got bits and pieces, but I have got, I am on Instagram on Nicky Pennie Coaching. And I have still got the Supercharge Your Riding Masterclass, and the discount for your listeners is still available. So I think the code is ER25, isn't it? If you want to get 25% off that. So anybody that's kind of thinking they want to know a little bit more, that would be a good place to start. And if you want to jump into my DMs and have a chat about anything a bit more that we've talked about today, then I'd be happy to do that as well.
Amazing listeners, I'll make sure all these links are in the show notes, including the discount codes. If you want to go check out any of Nicky's work, do head to our show notes where you can find all your links there. Thank you so much to Foreign Equine, who are supporting the Grassroots show this year. We are so grateful to have them on board. And of course, thank you, listeners, for number one, sending in your questions, because it's been great to hear what you want to work on before the start of the season. And of course, for tuning in. We have calmers and things like NutriCalm to help our horses calm down and focus. Hopefully this podcast can be your NutriCalm to help you calm down and focus before the start of the season. So we wish you all the best of luck as it starts very, very soon.